Hello and welcome back to bicyclelegs Talks Music and another episode of The Sequel to Success. And can you please welcome back to the channel from RushFans, Mr. Paul Simon. Paul, thank you so much for coming back on the channel. I've been looking for an opportunity to have you back since we did our episode in the bicyclelegs Talks Rush series. So I'm really glad we found something to have you back on the channel with.
And thank you for having me. I'm excited because when you gave me the list of some of the albums you wanted to talk about, and you brought up X for INXS, I'm like, yes, something I actually know about. I love Brush fans, don't get me wrong, but I've been binging INXS for weeks and for this, and it's been absolute joy. I it sort of renewed my vigor for the band, so it's been great going back through their discography and just getting into this stuff again. It's about
That's wonderful.
anti-rush.
Yeah. So yeah, as Paul's mentioned, today we're going to be talking about this album right here, X. Now, this album came out on the 25th of September 1990, and it was the follow-up to this behemoth here, Kick. Kick was the album that made INXS arguably the biggest band in the world for a brief period of time. Now, a little bit about Kick. Kick was released on the 19th of October 1987. Got to number 2 in Australia, got to number 9 in the UK, got to number 3 in the US. But the sales figures, 7 times platinum in Australia, 3 times platinum in the UK, 6 times platinum in the US. So that's 6 million copies sold. And just as a little added one, diamond in Canada. So a
Yeah.
million copies sold just in Canada. That's mind-blowingly big. So, and it was a huge album. I mean, it had the massive number 1 hit Need You Tonight on it. You know, it had so many hits on it. Never Tear Us Apart, New Sensation, Devil Inside. You know, it was just a massive, massive album. And INXS had broken through with the previous album, Listen Like Thieves, but this album took it to a whole new level.
Even the
So,
non-singles were huge. Mystify, Kick,
yeah.
Tiny Daggers, these you heard these songs everywhere.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. So hard act to follow. INXS toured for about a year and a half on Kick, and then they decided, you know what, we're going to take a year off. We're going to do some side projects, and so Michael Hutchence went off and did the Max Q thing. Various members of the band were involved with, particularly Gary Beers, were involved with Absent Friends. If you don't know that album, by the way, check it out. It's absolutely wonderful, including the wonderful Sean Kelly from Models and the wonderful, wonderful vocals of Wendy Matthews. Absolutely beautiful stuff. Their version of I Don't Want to Be With Nobody But You, just absolutely spine-tinglingly good. So, and then the other guys were involved with production and that sort of thing. I think Andrew Farris produced the second Jenny Morris album.
Kenny Morris. Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, they regrouped. That was their sort of 1989 was their year off to do side projects. They came back in 1990 to record this wonderful album here, X, which is the one we'll be talking about. This is the third album in a row that was produced by legendary producer Chris Thomas. You know, Chris Thomas had, worked with the Beatles on the White Album as an associate producer under George Martin. You know, he produced The Pretenders, he produced Sex Pistols, he produced Roxy Music. He's an absolutely legendary producer, and he'd done great work with INXS on Listen Like Thieves and Kick. So they brought him back to do X. Paul, you first really got into INXS with this album, didn't you?
Yeah, actually, I growing up in the Chicago area in the U.S., I was glued to America's Top 40, Casey Kasem doing the countdown. So I heard Don't Change. I heard The One Thing. I remember the video for The One Thing. You couldn't get away from it, which was great. I liked it a lot. I was one of those people who didn't know how to pronounce INXS when they first hit the States. So I was saying it wrong at age 10. But after that, they were on my radar, but I wasn't as into them. Like I heard Original Sin and loved it. Um, Knew that Daryl Hall sang uh, backups for it. Knew Nile Rodgers had produced it, but didn't really dive into them. Listen Like Thieves comes out, you couldn't get away from What You Need on the radio. And I just find funny that that song was sort of the extra throw on for the album, and that ended up being what really blew them open up here. So when Kick came out, I by then I was listening to a lot of heavy metal, so I acknowledged Kick and I liked it, but I got kind of ear fatigued when it came to Never Tear Us Apart. Really liked New Sensation. Devil Inside I loved. And what's funny is I saw an interview where they were talking about Devil Inside. I think it was Redbeard was talking with Michael and Andrew and asked if they'd ever had any problems, people giving them static, because that was the age of censorship. So, you had the Judas Priest trials and you had Two Live Crew and all that stuff going on. And they said, no, we didn't have any problem with Devil Inside, but Suicide Blonde, that's a different story, which we'll get to. So,
Mm.
what got me into really, really into NXS was I worked at a movie theater and we had a movie called Mystery Date with Ethan Hawke and Terry Polo and BD Wong. And both Suicide Blonde and Disappear were in the movie, and Disappear was over the end credits. While I had to clean the theater, I heard Disappear every like 5 times a day, for probably about 2 months. And it grew so much on me. I'm like, you know what? I think I'm going to go back and start listening to these guys. And that's what really got me into them. So from there forward, from X forward, I was all about them. Before that, it was just sort of casual listening. So,
Yep, fair enough. Whereas being an Australian, I grew up with INXS. I was actually lucky enough to literally get on board with INXS at the very, very beginning. Their very first single was a song called Simple Simon,
yep.
and it got played. They made a film clip for that on this children's show that I grew up with called Simon Townsend's Wonderworld.
Oh, wow.
And they appeared on that show and like were interviewed, and they did a little sort of, probably $30 film clip for Simple Simon. So I heard their very first single when they first were starting out, and I followed their career, sort of all the way through. And it, just absolutely wonderful. And then when, Listen Like Thieves and then Kick started to make them huge stars around the world, it made us as Australians feel great because, we hadn't had a lot of Australian bands be successful overseas. Probably the only band that had really been successful for an extended period of time overseas was Little River Band. You know, Men at Work were big for like 5 minutes, and then, they had, 4 or 5 hit singles, but, it was all in the space of a year, 18 months, and then they were gone.
82,
And,
83, yeah.
you
I was
know,
a diehard
and
Men at
then,
Work fanatic.
yeah, oh, great band. But, yeah, as I say, pretty much the only other Australian band that really had made it overseas in America for an extended period of time was Little River Band. And it could be argued that Little River Band didn't sound super Australian. They had kind of a West
I
Coast
agree.
sound.
I
Whereas I
would
think
agree.
in excess, they grew up in the pubs, the pub circuit and that sort of thing. And I think certainly earlier on they had a very Australian sound. And then they made it a more international sound as you get through, get into Listen Like Thieves and Kick and X. They made it a much more international sound, but they never lost that Australian flavor.
Agreed. And you could even, if you look farther back into the 70s, like the whole idea of glam rock, like Skyhooks or Hush, and then look at, the attitude of, say, an AC/DC, you can still pull little pieces of each of that because NXS was very video oriented. They were very much ahead of their time, but you guys had Countdown too. So there
Yeah,
was always a chance to have clips of things made. So the one thing being on heavy rotation made sense. What you need exploding here in the US at least was it was tailor made for MTV. So
yeah,
it was the right time. It was there,
yeah,
definitely their time. But that pub rock sound, I agree that they've kept that all along, even when they lean more towards new wave or they lean more towards the dance and they Michael encouraged the remixes and stuff. They still maintained that pub rock core. I agree.
yeah, absolutely. So let's do a deep dive into X, talk a little bit about each of the songs, and then, discuss how we feel it sort of relates to Kick. Is it a better album? Is it a worse album? And we'll then talk about, how it did and what came after. So
Sounds
obviously
good.
this album, starts off with the big hit single off it, which is Suicide Blonde.
Yeah. Up tempo can't go wrong. This has got a little bit of everything, which is one of the things A that carried it so far, I think, and B just that I love about it is the fact that you've got kind of like the up tempo, almost metronome precision drums from John. You've got the guitar is like NXS music is very percussive. Even like
Mm,
the guitar is very sharp sounding, and the drum sound, whether he's playing an electronic drum or an acoustic drum, is very clear. And Chris Thomas did a great job of recording that too. Um, but then you've got the blues harp sample from Charlie Musselwhite. Uh, not a live sound, that was a sample they decided to pull from his playing for the song. And it's such a hook. You've got the dance crowd, you've got the rock crowd. It's sort of what you need and you need you tonight. It's the same idea where it's got that you can get, dance people, rock people, all these different genres are represented in one song. It's brilliant.
yeah, absolutely. I feel that this song is sort of a spiritual successor to Need You Tonight.
I would agree
You know,
100%.
the guitar riff has nods to that, iconic guitar riff in Need You Tonight.
Yep.
The big, sort of point of difference, as you mentioned, is the harmonica. And I only recently found out that that was a sample rather than Charlie Musselwhite actually, Musselwhite actually playing, which he does actually play some live
Yep.
harmonica on a couple of the other tracks, which we'll get to when we go through. But yeah, I mean, it's a great song. It's, as you say, it's got that rock beat, but it's also got a bit of a dance feel to it. It's Suicide Blonde. You mentioned that title was a little bit controversial and that sort of thing, but
Yeah, they caught a lot of hell for that.
apparently that was a term that was introduced to Michael Hutchence by
Kylie.
by his girlfriend at the time, Kylie Minogue.
Yeah.
So because she was a blonde, and and we knew about it as Australians, we knew that term. Suicide blonde, died by your own hands. So
Exactly.
that
That's from the
so that's where it
60s,
comes from.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
But in that age
but
of the Judas Priest trials and all that, that was very controversial. And leave it to the
yeah.
US to screw it up for everybody. They raised the biggest hell over it. It's like, calm down. Even I knew
Yeah,
then. I'm like, calm down.
I mean that was kind of still in the middle of that whole PMRC thing, wasn't it?
Yeah,
So that sort of was sort of late 80s, early 90s, that whole Tipper Gore thing and all that. So I'm
yeah,
surprised they didn't slap one of those parental advisory stickers on it. But
yeah. It would have been right for the time for sure.
yeah,
But the one thing
absolutely.
I did catch in an interview with Tim Ferriss was that I'd never noticed before was the song never changes key. It stays in a major key for the verses, then goes to a minor key for the choruses. But they thought it was kind of daring, sort of like Need You Tonight. I know that when the band brought Need You Tonight to Chris Thomas, he said, it's not finished. And they're like, no, actually it is finished. That's the way we want it to sound. So with
Mm.
Suicide Blonde, um, the fact that the key never changes, they just go from major to minor and back to major. That's brave. That's very
Yeah,
brave.
absolutely. You expect a few different chord changes, but there really isn't in this song. It's very much written on a groove rather than on a chord progression.
Absolutely.
So then we get Disappear, which definitely does have a chord progression. And this is the song that hooked you in. So
Yep.
I'm sure you've got plenty of thoughts about this one.
Yeah, written by John Fair. Most songs, for those who don't know, originally INXS shared writing credits for everything or shared contributions for everything up until Listen Like Thieves, where after that, uh, Chris Murphy, excuse me, the manager, said to the band, "Look, if you want hits, do singles. Have your own version of like John Lennon and Paul McCartney." And that became Michael Hutchence and Andrew Ferris, who wrote just about everything on Kick. And then there were some contributing songs from other band members at some point. Disappear is an example of that for X, because that was written by John Ferris and Michael Hutchence when they were living in Hong Kong in '89. So when the X sessions rolled around, they brought it out. And I love the whole Motown roots feel of it. Um, I know the lyrical muse was Kylie, as far as where Michael got the inspiration for the lyrics for, where with all this, and this is going to be a theme of my take on the album versus Kick, is where Kick is, I don't mean this in any degrading sense, I mean this in the best sense, but one of the things that made it so popular is basically it was the equivalent of a party album. Everybody could get into it. It was very accessible, with an A, very accessible. And when X rolled around, the songs got more introspective and they got more worldly. I think it's a more mature writing, not slighting Kick. I'm simply saying the band grew and evolved. And I think Disappear is one of the ones that come from it, because it's funny to see there's a dichotomy here. We'll get into when we talk about by my side. If Disappear is you are the muse lyrically, you are the muse that can pull me away from the troubles of the world. It's cool to see how different By My Side is, with Andrew being the primary lyricist on that one. It's the same kind of
Yeah.
song, completely different take. So Disappear lyrically being this whole and very accessible dance song, like we were talking about, and that's what got me into it. Was I'm this metalhead who also likes pop music, and here's a song that makes me want. I can't dance to save my life, but this song made me want to dance. So I was hooked. So that they
Yeah.
in that whole hard to classify them. If you ask the band, they'd say they call themselves rhythm rock back then in the interviews, but they had this universal appeal to all these different genres, and Disappear is another great example of that. Very moody.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, of the singles off this album, this is the one I don't really feel like has an analog on Kick,
I
you
would
know.
agree to that too. Yeah.
Whereas, you know, the other singles, I can sort of listen to them and feel like, you know, it's a spiritual successor to a certain song, like Suicide Blonde is to Need You Tonight. I don't feel like that with Disappear. As you said, you know, it's got a bit of that sort of soul Motowny kind of feel to it. And but with that big sort of, I know this is 1990, but it's still got that sort of late 80s wallop to it. So,
Agreed.
you know,
That
again,
they're
that's
keeping
probably
their new
Chris.
wave root there too. That's another thing, is that's another style that's incorporated in here that you can hear, that
Yeah,
there's a natural evolution to their sound. This is a very INXS sounding song, but then if you
yeah,
pull a song like Please You Got That off Full Moon Dirty Hearts, you'd be hard pressed to say that's the same band. But once you know INXS, you're like, oh, of course it is.
yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, it's another great single. I don't think it did quite as well as Suicide Blonde did, though, which is a bit of a shame.
Not as high. Yeah,
No.
I can't remember the chart position. The teens, I think, maybe higher single
Yeah.
digits, but yeah, it wasn't a number one. But
So then we start to get into some of the deep tracks on this album with a song called The Stairs. So I'm interested to see how you feel about sort of some of the deep tracks on this album.
absolute banger. This is actually my favorite song on the album by leaps and bounds. Now, it wasn't then. Um, there's a long building intro to it, but the notes I put for myself. Andrew's chord choices are deceptively simple but very full bodied. Beautiful lyrics, vocal melodies, impressive harmony accents from Kirk and Andrew. Kirk's solo might be perfect, but very understated, the guitar solo in this. Um, Tim carries the rhythm perfectly. John and Gary are completely in tune with each other with the drums and the bass playing. Song lyrically being about how we can, very relevant to today, lack of communication. This was at a time when, like, the wall came down a little bit ago, and we're in the middle of the Gulf War. There's a lot of world tension, but why are we passing each other in the hallways and, story to story, street to street? We're just walking past each other, ignoring each other when this should be the time that we're all coming together. And
Yeah.
just to me, this is an absolutely epic song. It's beautiful, it's melodic, it's soaring. This is them at their peak to me musically. This is
Yeah.
what I love most about their music.
Absolutely. I feel like this is one of the songs where it does get away from that, sort of party feel that you got on Kick, and it was getting a little more exploratory and that sort of thing. Lyrically, I heard Michael say something about, he was inspired by, living in big city and that sort of thing. So,
Yes.
um, again, a bit of a different lyrical slant than you were getting on Kick, and that's really great too. So, yeah, I think it's one of the sort of buried treasures in the NXS catalog. So I totally agree with you. Uh, we get Faith in Each Other after that, which is another sort of deep track.
Yeah, funky bass line, more Motown inspired. That organ texture that Andrew uses is almost like a church organ kind of sound. So that's almost a throwback to the 60s. Sort of like whiter shade of pale type of feel to it almost. Kirk's sax highlights, the way he emphasizes his phrasing and pairs with Michael's vocals. I like it a lot on this song. This song did not grab me when I first heard it on the album. There are very few songs from INXS that I don't prefer the live versions to over the studio, and that's not belittling the studio at all. But when Chris Thomas came in as producer, one of the things that he absolutely wanted to do was he said he saw them live and said, "Why do you not sound like that on your albums?" The irony being, post Chris Thomas and beyond, and again, not a criticism of Chris, but I think that live they always sound so much more full as a six piece than they do on the albums. On the album, there's a compression. Maybe it was the years it was the stuff was recorded, but there's a compression of their dynamics that kind of bugs me. But when I see them live, it's always this full, lush, beautiful sound. So, point is with Faith in Each Other. They did a live version for in Rio, in Rock in Rio, and that's what got me to really like the song was seeing that live version. I'm like, see, they've got that energy on the album. It's a personal observation. It's not a criticism, but it doesn't grab me as much, even though it's got this funky bass line. It's got a good groove to it, but it's more so live. So if a
Yeah.
person's listening to the song or watching this and saying, yeah, that song didn't grab me either, check out the live version from Rio. It is phenomenal, and
Yeah.
it got me into the song.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's available here on YouTube somewhere.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it's a good track. It's not one of my favorites, and but I know what you mean about some bands, I don't know if you know another Australian band called Hunters and Collectors.
No.
They were sort of contemporary with INXS, but they never sort of broke out into the international market. They were big here in Australia, but they never really made much of a ripple overseas. They were a band where I sort of had heard some of their songs and thought, yeah, they're all right, you know. And then I went to a concert where they were one of the acts. It was sort of like a one of those concerts where there's like four or five different acts on the show.
Hmm.
And they played live, and that's what clicked them for me. It was like, wow, this band is so good live. I need to explore these albums and so on and so on. So,
That's how I was with
yeah,
Extreme. Anyone who heard Extreme on the radio and heard More Than Words or Wholehearted, like, oh, they're the acoustic guys. They're another band that defies. And I've done an episode with Grant's Rock Warehouse talking about Extreme's discography. They're another band that defies classification for starters, but some of the most talented musicians living, in my opinion, all coming together. I mean, going back to Wembley for a second, they played the Queen tribute to Freddie Mercury. They played a medley of Queen songs that knocked 70,000 people on their butts. So another band that when you see them live, you're like, where did this come from? That's them. You got to catch them and you got to watch the live concerts or go if you have the ability to.
yeah,
So.
absolutely. And then side one closes out with another one of the big singles off this album, By My Side. And you were alluding to this one earlier about sort of the comparison between Disappear and By My Side lyrically. Musically, they're very, very different as well. So,
What's this is here's where I show my American ignorance. By My Side was not big here, so
mm,
I got into that by listening to the album. Like that song proves to me it's got legs because I didn't even know how big it was everywhere else. Typical ignorance, but uh, Andrew and Kirk song, so it breaks that Andrew and Michael kind of strangle on their most of their material. Uh, but Andrew and Kirk wrote it originally. The demo was called Dark of Night, and then Andrew brought the whole idea By My Side, writing about his wife Shelley. And I think it was a big mistake that this wasn't a single in the U.S. because I think this would have really propelled the album farther because it's different from Never Tear Us Apart musically, but it's got the soul of it. Spiritual Successor would be a great way I'd call this
yeah.
one to Never Tear Us Apart. And the U.S. went so insane for Never Tear Us Apart. I think it was a big mistake from whoever the A&R person was by not pushing this hard as a single. Maybe instead of Bitter Tears, which was the third single here in the U.S., I would have put By My Side as the third single, to be honest.
Yeah.
And getting back, we talked about the Stairs already, but that was only a single in the Netherlands. That's another one that I think, even if they to make it radio friendly, if you lop off a little bit of the beginning, I wouldn't like it, but to make it radio friendly, you lop off a little bit of that. I think that would have been a killer single. So,
Yeah. Absolutely.
but yeah, this
Well,
is classic. Yeah,
By My Side didn't sort of get to the top of the charts here, but it was all over radio. And it still gets played a lot on sort of classic rock radio here. And yeah, absolutely a spiritual successor to Never Tear Us Apart. Musically, it's a lot less bombastic than Never Tear Us Apart is,
yeah,
you know, um, but it still has that feel to it. And it's got, they're both in 6/8 as well, and I think that gives them that feel. It's got that one, two, three, four,
like a
five, that
waltz,
almost,
exactly.
yeah. So, and then lyrically, it's sort of about, Andrew wants to be off the road and be with his family, sort of thing. And,
Yeah,
that's a common sentiment, I think, in a lot of sort of songs by major bands who are touring for as long as, as we said, that Kick tour was a year and a half they were on the road all around the world. So,
yeah.
to
I
be
think
away
I
from your
compare it to
family
like
for that
Faithfully.
long.
Yeah, I compare it to like Faithfully from Journey. Exact same
Hmm.
sentiment behind it, completely different song, and a beautiful way of expressing it. So,
Yeah.
not to anger the Journey fans, but I think By My Side's a more beautiful and romantic song than Faithfully. So,
Yeah. So we get into side two, and I think this is an interesting thing about this album, and I'm not talking about quality wise, but I'm just talking about singles wise. This
mhm.
album's rather front loaded. You've got three singles
Yes,
out of five on side one, and you've only got one single out of six songs on side two. So you've got a lot more deep tracks or deep cuts on side two. And it starts off with a song that I really like, which is Lately.
yeah, I like Lately. That's another one that didn't. It didn't not again. I there's no song on here I don't enjoy, but Lately was another one sort of like Faith in Each Other, where it took me a little bit to come around to it, just because I heard like it's up tempo, but the lyrics were sort of melancholic, so I didn't really know what to make of it. Again, that maturity we were talking about. But
Hmm.
another song about the world not being up to expectations. Um, but eventually the hooks kind of got into me both literally and figuratively, and made me really start liking it. But that this was another one that seeing it live is what made it punch for me. So I don't know if it's a
Yeah.
dynamic range thing or what, but watching Live Baby Live, that version, and like, how did I not love this song? So,
Mhm.
but it's a good driving song. There's a couple songs on here where I'm like, if I made a driving playlist, this would be on it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what makes it a good side opener too.
Yes.
So, because, I'm talking records here, you have side one, side two, you know. One of the interesting things about this album is this was, 1990. So we're well and truly into the CD age at this stage.
Mhm.
but INXS weren't sort of tempted like a lot of other bands were to make these overlong albums, these hour-long albums or whatever. This is still only sort of 41, 42 minutes long. So I think that's a commendable thing because there isn't a lot of filler on this album.
I
So,
agree.
and I think a lot of albums, late 80s, early 90s, you know, bands were going, oh, we've got all this extra time. Let's put 16 songs on the album. Whereas 10, 11 songs, they might have had good ones, and then they're sort of scraping through, what have we got on left on our demo tapes and that sort of thing to put these extra songs on the album. And NXS didn't sort of fall into that trap. Certainly not with this album, and I think that's very, very commendable. I think Lately's a great driving song, as you mentioned, and I think it's a really great way to open side one. But
Mhm.
then we get Who Pays the Price after that, which I find very bluesy. I don't know about you. I mean, you get Charlie Musselwhite blowing his sort of harp, his blues
Yeah.
harp on this sort of thing, and it's interesting to see In Excess going down this sort of bluesy kind of path, don't you think?
I absolutely love this is another there's three songs that are three non-singles on this album that absolutely just punch me, and this is the second one. First one was The Stairs. I heard the demo because it was a B-side and it was released on the 2002 special edition remaster. It didn't have the bombastic chorus, the heavier guitars, didn't have Charlie playing on it, obviously, but just ballsy song. I think it's probably my favorite X song off Live Baby Live because of how bombastic it is. It is a powerful version. Um, and lyrically, it's another song that's got that same theme. It seems like we never have enough, and tomorrow isn't looking all that great. We've forgotten our past, and we lose perspective on the present. But it's just a commanding song. If you, like again said, if you see the live version, it's of Live Baby Live. It's like a foot stomper. This is another one that appeals. It's got the guitar riff for the rock crowd. It's got the beat for the dance crowd. It's got the message for the college radio, which was really the key to Kick being a success, which we kind of skipped over that. They
Yeah.
couldn't get Kick. Atlantic tried paying Chris Murphy $1 million to not release it. They're like, we can't do anything with this. And it turned out to be the biggest album in the world. So his way in was hitting college radio and campus radio. So to me, Who Pays the Price sort of appeals even to that crowd because it's got that highly socially conscious message, but
Yeah.
just an absolute banger of a song.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it is interesting to hear them again taking a more serious lyrical tone. Michael's, not just singing about the sorts of things he was singing about on earlier albums. He is getting into sort of social commentary and that sort of thing. So, but yeah, I mean, the thing that gets me about this song, you talk about it being bombastic and all that sort of thing, but it's the bluesiness of it, which I think is the point of difference uh,
Yes.
over a lot of other In Excess songs. Uh, you know, yeah, it has a bit of a dance quality, but the next song, Know the Difference, is just pure dance song, pure dance music.
And that's funny because again, very subjective. I'm not giving commentary objectively on the song itself. This is my least favorite song on the album, just because I'm not as into the dance side of it. So they didn't write this for me. That being said, it's still an excellent song. It's got that funky but understated guitar work. Got effect wise, they have a phaser on it, which I like. I think it sounds really good. Um, Another one that's fantastic live. Michael's vocals, it's either almost to falsetto or actually goes into falsetto. But this is another one of those lyrically, it's a song. This would have fit on Kick lyrically, which,
Yeah,
very much about the whole like, wants a girl, doesn't want him. I think you're better off without the guy you're with. You'd be better off with me, that kind of thing. What you do as opposed to what you say. Again, great song, just this isn't as much my thing, but very catchy. It's got all the right hooks in the right places, so it's still them being them.
absolutely. Um, I like it quite a lot because I feel like it is very dancey, but it's
Mhm.
also it's got some of that earlier sound, a bit new wavy and that sort of thing. So,
Yep.
which I mean, new wave was the first music I ever got into as a kid. So, I'm always going to be. There's a song coming up that I think is even more of a nod to sort of earlier INXS, but we'll get to that when we get to it.
Yep.
The next song we're going to look at, though, is the last song on this album that was released as a single. It wasn't the last single, but it was, you know,
Yep.
last one on the album as far as sort of, going through the sequence. And that's Bitter Tears, with
Yeah.
the big um, synth horns, which was a big,
Yep.
big thing in the 80s, Um, and yeah, again, got that sort of Motown-y kind of feel, doesn't it?
Very. And another driving tune. It's got that very consistent, like the Andrew's piano playing on this is like you could just picture him banging away at a piano on this.
Hmm.
He like in an interview, Andrew likened it to the same feel as What You Need. And what's funny is that's obviously he wrote it, he'd know, but I hadn't picked up on that because What You Need, I was so focused on the guitar and the funkiness of it, and Bitter Tears has, as you said, more of a nod to Motown, so I wouldn't have put those two together. The minute I heard that in the interview, I'm like, how did I miss that all these years? So
Hmm.
I like the fact that you've got a rock song that has pop edges, that has a Motown foundation. Again, we're hitting all these different genres. So definitely, and great hooks because this is how many times can you repeat, you know, the chorus? So
Yeah,
it sticks with you. It's a brilliant
absolutely.
pop song.
You know what the correlation between this and what you need is? It's the drums.
Okay.
It's the drums don't sound quite the same. They don't have the same wallop that they do on what you need, but
Hmm.
it's the kind of the same drum beat. It's that boom, boom, ba boom, 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 ba
Yeah.
boom. You know, um,
Yeah.
that's I think where those two have a similarity. So,
That makes sense.
that's maybe what he's getting at with the feel of the song and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But again, this is a song that, didn't get to the upper echelons of the charts here in Australia, but still got played on the radio all the time.
Same
All
here.
these singles just got played on the radio all the time. And if you listen to sort of your classic rock stations here, your Triple M's and that sort of thing, you're still going to hear this song played from time to time because, you know, this album was very, very big. So we end with a couple of songs that are, again, sort of deep cuts. And I'll be interested to hear what you think of On My Way because I definitely have some thoughts about this one.
Straight up pub rock and another perfect driving song. Absolutely perfect. I love this song. I love Charlie Musselwhite's playing on it. This song, I can only imagine being the band and then having him come in and playing that blues harp on this and then like hearing what it does to the song. This really kicks a lot of butt to me. This is another one that's
Yeah.
up there with Who Pays the Price, where not only again live version absolutely cranks, but just trying to stick with the studio version, absolutely killer playing from everybody on this. This is the band at their tightest when you can play
Yeah.
this kind of song and this. That's again, anyone watching this probably knows they paid their dues. They lived together, they traveled together, they drove days to get to mines to play for miners. You can tell these guys spent all this time together because they are so tight on this song that you can't fake this. This is not a studio creation. And that's one of the things that bothered me comparing the two albums, not in making comparisons, but seeing interviews where people were saying, well, it's not Kick, or, oh, they're playing it safe. This is Kick 2. This song is a perfect example of how this is not Kick 2 in every way.
Mm.
It's just, and it's not that it's any better, but it's just so much of a great evolution of they're as tight as they were on Kick, but now they're taking that to the next level. So I think the
Yeah.
song is another absolute great one.
The interesting thing is that I don't think this song sounds like Kick at all, but I think it wouldn't have sounded out of place on Listen Like Thieves.
Agreed. Agreed.
Um, you know, which, I'm different from you in that, I grew up with the band right from the beginning, and I love the early INXS. That's my jam. I mean, I
Mhm.
love everything 80s and 90s INXS. Really, there's no bad albums as far as I'm concerned. Switch,
Yeah.
eh, but um, yeah, anything with Michael Hutchence on it, I really really like. So, but the early in excess, that's really my jam, because
Yeah.
again, it's the very new wavy stuff, and that was my first love musically. And this is, this song, super new wavy, super pub
Yeah.
rocky, as you say, but then with that point of difference of Charlie Musselwhite on the harmonica, which you wouldn't have got on Listen Like Thieves or
Yeah.
any of those earlier albums. So again, that gives it that little point of difference, and I really really like that about it.
Yeah.
So the album closes out with Hear That Sound.
Best closing song from them on an album. Don't want to divide anybody, and maybe other people like Tiny Daggers more or Red Red Sun or something like that. But what an amazing, because this to me, if you, this couldn't have been anything other than an album closer. It wouldn't even worked as good as a side A closer. It had to close because it's got this. We need to talk about everything we've talked about. We need to wrap it all up. This is the song that does it, and it covers every genre that they're trying to hit. It's got, the up tempo or driving tempo kind of thing, but it's got that sort of new wave synth sound, airy sound to it. You could almost hear the Chris Thomas uh, input on this, where it's just this very beautiful, airy, like ethereal sound to it. The piano highlights and the call and response when Michael's singing the chorus, hear that sound, and do 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 do. This song, it grabs my spirit.
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful song. And what's funny is it's in the middle of their live set and it still works. As much as this is a
Mm,
great album closer, I'm glad this was never a concert closer because I think with them being as big as they were, they needed to close on, Don't Change was the classic close. But even when they didn't have enough time to play it at Wembley and they closed, I think, with What You Need, that still worked. This is just the quintessential album closer. And then they do that little reprise. They come back in after the song ends and then keep the record playing and or the CD on or the stream going. And then it kind of reminds you and there's an echo of the song. I think that's
mm.
great move.
I really don't think I can add anything to that. That was a wonderful description of that song. The only thing is, I do think I don't know that I can go past "Don't Change" as an album closer, but from Shabu Shabar. But
And that
um,
shows where I came from. Exactly. I
yeah,
agree.
but other than that, I agree with you 100% on Hear That Sound. I think it's a really good album closer, and I don't think, as I say, I can really add anything that you haven't already said. So thank you for that wonderful description of that last song. This is an album, ladies and gentlemen, that have some great In Excess deep cuts. So it's worth exploring for that. So this album, how did it do? Well, it didn't do kick numbers, but I don't think that was realistic to expect. It
Yeah.
still did very, very well. It got to number one here in Australia. In fact, it debuted at number one on the charts. Got to number two in the UK. Got to number five in the US. Double platinum in Australia. Platinum in the UK. Double platinum in the US. Not too shabby.
Yeah. Well done. Well done.
So I think I already know the answer to this, but I have to ask you the question, Paul.
Hmm.
Pick X. Which do you think is a better album?
Better album. Rough question. Rough question. I gotta go with X because of the maturity, and that's not knocking Kick at all. I think there are more classics on Kick. I think it's a more single album, a single friendly album. I think there's more bangers on Kick. But that being said, I like it's a preference, but I like my music to make me think a little bit, and I'm a sucker for either orchestra sounds or hard rock driving type songs, just something that's going to kind of get me both here and here. And X does that a little more for me than Kick does. Kick
Yeah.
gets me
Mhm.
here and other places. X gets me a little bit more here, and so I enjoy it
Yeah.
more.
No, fair enough. Personally, I'd probably just, and it would be only just, give it to Kick.
Yep.
And if you'd asked me back in the day, I would have said, "Oh, Kick's a much better album." When X first came out, I have to admit personally, I was a little disappointed in it.
Sure.
And but it's one of those albums that's really grown on me over the years, to the point where I feel like it's an album that doesn't get the respect that it deserves in the
I
NXS
agree with that
catalog.
completely. Yeah.
So it would be only by a hair. And I agree with you. I think it's a more substantive album
Yep.
than Kick, whereas Kick is, sort of, the chock full of hits album. But whereas I think this has got a lot more great deep cut
Yep.
tracks. But
See, now if you ask me
it's
what my favorite song of theirs is, that's where I'm going to sound like I'm from outer space compared to what we've talked about, because in no particular order but close, my favorite songs from NXS are probably, let me think, Not Enough Time off Welcome to Wherever You Are, The Strangest Party off Greatest Hits, which was probably my ranking number one for a very long time, um, The Gift off Full Moon Dirty Hearts, and, as sacrilege as this may sound, Afterglow off Switch. Afterglow, I actually played at my wife's funeral along with The Garden from Rush. That song got me through a very tough time in my life.
mm,
So I just think that is Andrew at his absolute, I mean, his peak era is definitely writing with Michael, no doubt. But for him to still have a song like Afterglow in him, mind
yeah,
blowing to me. So, and it doesn't sound
no,
like almost anything off. So I know we're not going to talk about Switch, but that song, it has to. I had to throw a mention out to him because oh my God, what an amazing song! That has everything
yeah,
that I liked about Hear That Sound with remembering somebody. So I just think it's a beautiful
yeah.
composition.
No, well, that's you can't argue with that when it's got a personal um,
Yeah.
connection with you like that, can you? So what came after X? Well, the very next year they put out this live album here, Live Baby Live, and that is how you pronounce it, boys and girls. I looked it up. Um, and look at that picture. Just iconic, isn't it? And I mean, this is in excess live, obviously, you know, Wembley Stadium, peak of their powers, just, 80,000 people or however many there were at Wembley. And it's a great live album. As much as it's a great live album, though, I think you've really got to get the DVD to get the full experience and that sort of thing.
And I'm glad you said that because that fired another neuron. In doing my research on this, between reading album reviews and I read through Story to Story, the official biography, I was floored that Live Baby Live, when it came out, it wasn't slammed critically, but it was heavily criticized. The one thing I read on here was I pulled it up on purpose because I try not to shame too many people, but this bothered me. It's a lifeless album. All the performances sound like the studio versions, stripped of their excitement and savvy productions. Pompous and larger than life. For starters, that doesn't make sense. And it's the exact opposite of my take on it and every take I've ever heard. Most people say this is a must own concert film, directed by David Mallet, who also directed Grace Under Pressure Live from Rush and stuff for Queen. David Bowie did Pulse from Pink Floyd. And like, that was an amazing once in a lifetime concert. So, not sure where that came from. Yeah.
No, no, no. They were a great live band, and I think that's a very good live document. But the
Yes.
next studio album, and we've got different covers for this because CD and album had different covers, and that was Welcome to Wherever You Are. Now, CD or album or vinyl, I think we can agree, terrible album cover. So I think
Horrible.
that was a problem for this album for a start.
Yeah,
I think album covers do make a difference.
I would agree. It's not
Yeah,
recognizable as an NXS album. There's a
yeah.
marketing brand they have to be cognizant of, and I don't think it was here.
This was 1992. This album came out 3rd of August 1992. We're in the, smack bang in the middle of the grunge era by this stage. So
Yeah.
INXS were kind of considered a little irrelevant, I think, by this point. They were still doing well in the UK, not so much in the US, not so much here in Australia, and they parted ways with Chris Thomas. They went back to Mark Opitz,
Yep.
who's an Australian producer, very good producer too. Actually, an old school friend of mine has worked with Mark Opitz as an engineer.
Excellent.
So, but but yeah, and mixed by Bob Clearmountain, so he's one of the biggest guys in the world to mix
Yeah.
albums and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But this
Dynamics.
album didn't do as well. This album did
And they
not do
didn't
as
tour in
well.
support of it either.
Yeah. So as far as this album went, it got to number 2 here in Australia. It actually got all the way to number 1 in the UK, only got to number 16 in the US. But those chart positions are a little deceiving too, because it just didn't have the staying power of those earlier albums. And that is uh, reflected in the certifications. Gold in Australia, gold in the UK, single platinum in the US. And as far as, certifications and chart positions and that sort of thing, it was kind of only downhill from here. This was 1992, and of course, it would only be 5 years later that we would sadly lose Michael Hutchence,
Yeah.
and that would more or less, with a few exceptions, be basically the end of the NXS story, which is rather sad. But those last 3 albums, I think, again, they are albums that I think are crying out for a critical reappraisal.
Oh, Full Moon, Dirty Hearts, and Welcome Wherever You Are, especially putting the focus on them. Not to slam Elegantly Wasted, but those two albums, I can make a greatest hits album of or playlist of my own just based on my favorites off those two albums. You've got Make Your Peace, you've got Please with Ray Charles. Talk about a spiritual successor to the stuff they did with Charlie Musselwhite. Having I saw a live version of them doing Please You Got That with Ray Charles. I think it was some talk show here in America. Unbelievable. I remember actually watching that live as it aired. But The Gift, huge song, it just sonically. Um, Full Moon Dirty Hearts with Chrissy Hines, just great songs. And then going back to Welcome Wherever You Are, you've got Heaven Sent, Baby Don't Cry, Not Enough Time, Taste It, Beautiful Girl. These are classics in my opinion.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And they just they didn't, like, I mean, these albums still did okay, but they
yeah,
just weren't massive the way that
no, the music
Listen
zeitgeist
Like
had moved
Thieves.
on.
They weren't massive the way Listen Like Thieves, Kick, and X were.
Yeah,
So
sure.
there
Yeah,
you
and
have it. Those are our thoughts on X, specifically as it relates to being a follow-up to the massive album that was Kick. Please let us know in the comments what your thoughts on this album are and what your thoughts on INXS more generally are, because we'd love to hear in the comments what your thoughts are. If you don't know this album, go and have a listen to it and let us know in the comments what you think. Paul, thank you so much for doing this. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you back on the channel.
been great being here. Thank you. It's been wonderful to be being able to actually talk to somebody about this stuff.
Yeah.
So,
And I'm so glad that I could have somebody so passionate about this album to talk about it too.
oh yeah,
So thank you.
absolutely.
Please do like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel out. If you're new to the channel, please go and have a look at some of my other videos. I have everything playlisted, so if you want to see some of my other sequel to success shows, I have a playlist for those. If you want to see some of my studio albums ranked shows, I have a playlist for those. And if you want to see my appearances on other people's channels, I also have a playlist for those. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at bicyclelegs on Instagram, Twitter, and a bunch of other places. I also have a dedicated bicyclelegs Facebook page. Links are all in the doobly-doo. Please do give those all a follow and join in the conversation. I'd really love to have you there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.